Okay, so welcome back to Soundbites. Today I'm talking to Poet Comeau, owner of Lake City Cider. And we're doing so on the eve of the East Coast Cider Fest. So the East Coast Cider Fest takes place this Saturday, May 18th at the Marriott Hotel on Halifax Waterfront. So welcome, Poet.
Thank you.
So before we get into the Cider Festival, tell me a little bit about your journey. I obviously have known you for quite a while, but maybe for others don't know you, how did you come to be the owner of a cider house?
I mean, I think there's a few things that got me to where I am, but I think one was traveling. I was lucky enough in my early 20s to take kind of a gap year in school. And I ended up in the UK, and the UK just has such a rich history in cider production and cider drinkers. And it was just so prevalent. And at that time, I knew beer didn't really like me back. I didn't really know why, but beer just wasn't a choice my body was willing to take. And so cider was like kind of the next best thing. And in the UK, there was just such an abundance of it. So I just really enjoyed that experience, enjoyed tasting all the different styles and types. And that kind of stuck with me. I think that's really where the seed was planted, we'll say. And then, obviously fast forward, I mean, I didn't go from my early 20s, leave the UK and start a cidery. So then I kind of got into the world of alcohol beverage, and I kind of got into that world a little haphazardly, doing tastings and working events, and then kind of did my sommelier, kind of got into the theory a little bit more and got a little more robust. And I loved it. Like I love the story of different areas and different productions and regionality and what it means. And my dad grew up in the Valley, right in Wolfville, and kind of center of apple land. So it was kind of like a few different streams of kind of who I am and my experiences. And then, what we saw about 5 years ago, a little bit more than obviously, probably 5-6 years ago, is Dartmouth was changing. The craft industry was changing. And I just saw an opportunity that, I live in Dartmouth. I grew up here. I'm a proud Dartmouthian. And I saw this opportunity to kind of, if I don't open a cider downtown Dartmouth and someone else does, I'm going to be really upset. And so I think that kind of was like, well, then I better do something about it. So I took all those pieces, the sommelier, the understanding, kind of the history of apples in Nova Scotia, and was like, let's do this.
Yeah. So you say you came from your dad having that connection to the Valley. You talk about the history. Do you think we give enough attention to the cideries, considering how rich a history Nova Scotia has in apples? I know I'm guilty of focusing on the wine industry way more than I do craft beer and craft cider. Do you think, as a general rule, though, we're not giving enough attention to our cideries, given its historic importance, or apples, to this province?
I mean, I guess that's a hard one. I think that I think that you can't discredit what the wine regions have done and the wine growth in our province has done for, I think, just alcohol production in general. And I think we have such a great story within, Tidal Bay and the different steps and the multiple different layers you can look at when you look at the growth of the wine industry. And it's really created more educated consumers that want to consume local. And that's good for cider, even though that's not cider direct. Right. But yeah, I think there's so much rich history within our apple growing community. There's so much there. And I think part of our work with even the Nova Scotia Cider Association is kind of relying and going backwards into that history and going, there's a lot here. There's a lot of meat. There's a lot of flesh. Yes. on these apples that we should be talking about, we should be looking at. And there's still a rich and growing industry within our apple growers. So even though I know we talk about agriculture and our farmers need help and all these things, but if you look at the apple industry on the growing side, our apples are getting more money per weight than Ontario apples. So our apples here are, if we put value to better, quality, then our apples are better quality. And so if you have better quality apples, then you should be not only selling great apples for direct consumption to market, but the other part is you should be making amazing ciders. And so I think the two are absolutely related. It kind of blows my mind that cider in North America fell way off. It kind of all strung around Prohibition, which seems ages ago, honestly, over 100 years.
But we know the legacy is still there.
It's still there. And if you really drive around Nova Scotia and you start looking at abandoned apple trees, you will find them everywhere. And again, you can tie that back to history. Is back in the day, everyone had a homestead. And in those homesteads, you would grow your own apple trees because usually you made your own kind of family recipe cider. And so all these things just kind of fell away. And so I think that, to be honest, like the cider in Nova Scotia that's being produced is some of the best in Canada. I think it's because we have such a rich history and rich soils that grow amazing, and temperature as well, climate that grows amazing trees. So great fruit. And I'd love to see more attention in the cider category, obviously.
And I think, as you spoke to, from an economic perspective too, we get a high value return for our apples. We're probably and probably that's growing every year as cider probably demands unique varieties and things like that. What about climate change? And because apples I would guess, are doing relatively well on sustaining some of the climate chaos that we've had over the number of years, which has perhaps impacted the wine industry to a much higher level. Would you say that's true, that apples are dealing with the changes in climate better than some other agricultural products?
Yes, I agree. I mean, we definitely see really it's more timeliness. Apples tend to be very hardy. The trees themselves, the fruit tend to be quite hardy. The biggest concern usually is those storms that we get, around September, October, obviously, and that's usually when we get a few tropical storms coming into Nova Scotia. Depending on where they hit and how hard, sometimes we get more drops than not. So that's kind of been the biggest fear. But honestly, I think that apples are such a hardy growing tree, and we've been growing them in Nova Scotia for so long that I think they tend to be able to combat the changes a little bit easier than grapes. I mean, grapes are thin-skinned, very,
much more tender vines, that compare.
And much more tender, yeah. And even the fruit's more tender. And, you can't have, a lot can happen in a vineyard. They're very, although you'll see the newer orchards being they look a little more like vineyards these days because they're all trained on dwarf root systems. So they're all lower, and they tend to be, lower to the ground, makes it easier for a lot of different reasons. But it is, the concern's not quite, I think, as high. I do think with the association talking to their cideries, we do always want to have, what ifs, the apples don't grow, and what can we do as far as local cider that makes sure that we can still produce and continue as businesses, even in bad harvests. We haven't seen it, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. But hopefully that just means other Canadian fruit. I think it's, Nova Scotia first. If need be, it's other Canadian, apples. So talking about and we'll dive into the festival, the fun stuff in a second. But talking about protection of identity, because I think that's a talking point for all industries. Is how do we acknowledge what is grown here? How's the cider industry doing in identifying products that are actually made from Nova Scotia grown apples or fruit and vinified here? Huh? We're getting there. Right now we're working with the NSLC with some stuff that we can do within their walls around kind of locally grown products. And you'll see that program roll out within probably the next 6 months. Probably this fall we'll start to see it. And it really does have to do with, kind of making a definition on what Nova Scotia cider is, what qualifies it as that, and there are actual rules and guidelines that qualify to meet that program. And one of the big ones in there is 100% Nova Scotia apples. So the identifier for us, because of the history of cider, there is no reason why anyone who wants to produce and put on their label Nova Scotia cider shouldn't be using 100% Nova Scotia apples.
Agreed. Okay, so let's talk about the fun stuff. So East Coast Cider Fest coming up this weekend. What can a participant expect if they buy a ticket and walk into those doors at the Marriott?
Well, it's a great atmosphere. You're going to be, welcomed by a whole bunch of different folks from around the province and a few outside the province, which is always a treat. You're going to be able to taste ciders that range anywhere from complete dryness to probably very sweet to some dessert ciders as well. Cider, it has the full gamut. You can try ciders that are obviously paired with other fruits like pear. Maybe you'll try, there's probably going to be a perry in there, which is 100% pear juice fermented, similar to a cider, but obviously pear, not cider, or not apples, sorry. We'll have some ones that we have some that we have a peach cider and we have a raspberry cider from Lake City. So those will be there. And really it's all about, I think, enjoying, the discovery of something you haven't had, talking to producers and finding out different maybe production styles. And I think for the consumer, it's about learning what you like the most. And therefore, when you go shopping, you can, discover the ones you kind of feel more confident in trying new and you're going to like them.
And you alluded to some innovation in terms of other fruits and things like that. And I think there is some exciting innovation on the cider side. I love some of the vinous ciders too, those combinations, or hopped ciders, where we're blending aspects of the wine and beer industries with cider. And I think it makes a lot of sense business-wise and on an ecological side too. What are some of the new things coming out of Lake City?
Well, this time of year for us, we always focus a little bit more towards Pride. We've done a Pride cider every year. With that one, we actually do a blackcurrant wine in-house. So we fermented that in-house. I think blackcurrants are such a great fruit and underestimated. I think it's an underdog. Packs so much flavor, so much color, and it makes a really nice rosé when you blend it with apples. And to the innovation part, I think apples can create such a great base and kind of complement to so many different flavors. So it makes it quite easy, I think, to complement. We always try and, when we do a blend or co-ferment, we always want to make sure, though, that the apple's still there, that we're not covering it up. It's not just in the background, that it actually is part of it. But yeah, going back to Pride. So we're a sponsor of the Halifax Pride, as well as we do some work with EGAL Canada. As far as donations go, they do great work when it comes to legalities and fighting for rights around all across Canada. So those will be there. We also have some raspberry one. Again, same concept. We like doing fruit wines that pair with our cider. It's more like you create two products that are somewhat similar, and then somewhat stable as well. So they're more stable. So when they blend them together, they kind of fuse nicely together.
Amazing. So it sounds like it's going to be a whole lot of fun. If let's say if consumers aren't going to be able to get to the Cider Fest, but they want to come try some Lake City cider, where do we find you?
Oh, we are right downtown Dartmouth. If you haven't been downtown Dartmouth, you got to come. There's so many great small businesses, but we are on 35 Portland Street. We have 8 taps flowing, and we usually have a few bottles that we crack for tastings. You can do flights, you can do pints. We even have a cider slushy for the summertime, so that rotates flavors, but super fun to sip on the patio on a sunny day, especially like today. It's 20 degrees. But so yeah, lots to try. Staff are super educational, so you can talk to them about anything from cider or where to grab lunch in downtown Dartmouth.
Amazing. And Dartmouth is becoming, or I guess you would say it's always been cool, but cooler. It's becoming cooler.
It's gotten better. Yeah.
Anyway, so don't forget, everybody watching, support local, and when you can, buy direct from your local producer, because it really helps a lot. So thanks, Poet.
Yeah. And you get to meet us if you come to our shops, right?
You do. So thank you, Poet.